12:50 on Wednesday, March 17, and I wanted to talk for a few moments about the horrific shootings that just happened overnight in Atlanta. And so I'm going to be talking about those. I've been tweeting about them this morning, and I want to just say a few words regarding them today. Before I begin, as I always do, I want to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from the lands now known as Washington, D.C., and that these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor and thank the Piscataway for being the indigenous hosts of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands, and I want to publicly state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. I woke up this morning and was listening to the news and was hearing about the shootings of 8 people in Georgia. 6 of them were Asian women. 7 of them were women, and one of them was a male. And this was devastating to hear, right? Because we have a lot of these mass racially and gender targeted shootings very frequently in our country. And it's very disheartening when we see them happening. And there has been a growing amount of violence, or actually an awareness of the violence enacted against Asian Americans in our country. And it has been coming to the forefront more and more, especially in regards to the pandemic and the racial overtones that have been used to talk about the origins of the virus and everything else, which has led to a heightened and even aggravated sense of attitude towards Asian Americans. And when I got online this morning, one of the things I first noticed was that one of the hashtags being used was Asians are human. And this really discouraged me. I mean, it's absolutely true. I absolutely believe in and advocate for the humanity of Asian Americans. But just like we have to do with Black Lives Matter and Native Lives Matter, and now Asians are human, as people from the margins, this nation forces us to advocate for our humanity. It forces us to stand up and say, no, we count too. We are human too. And that is so, at times, discouraging. And the reason we have to do this is because of the fundamental, both implicit and explicit biases of our nation. Right? Biases that state that white men are superior. Literally, in our Declaration of Independence, in our Constitution. Our Constitution defines men, defines people, defines those who are human as white men. The Declaration of Independence, which states, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. It doesn't mention women. And men back in 1760s and 70s and 80s meant white men. The Constitution starts, we the people. It actually defines it a few lines later when it excludes women, excludes natives, never mentions women, excludes natives, and counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. White men is who it means. These are the foundations of our nation. And our nation has acted violently against the environment and against people that it does not include as equal. And so when I saw the response, and it's the needed response, right? It's the needed response of, yes, there is a growing violence and a growing an awareness of violence. Some people say the violence has always been there against Asian Americans. And we need to respond by reminding our nation of the humanity of Asian Americans, just like we do with Black Lives Matter and Native Lives Matter and other marginalized groups matter. Yes. But the fundamental lie at the root of that is that white people are not superior. That's the lie our nation believes. That's the lie our foundations are built on. That's the lie that gets repeated over and over and over, both implicitly and explicitly by the structures and the institutions of this country. is that there is a belief that white people are superior, and that is an absolute lie. I condemn the violence, the shootings that happened in Georgia, and the violence that is being enacted against Asian American men and women throughout our country. I was looking this morning for the names of the victims, and I only found the names of the victims in Cherokee County. And the 4 victims there that I could find their names were Delania Ashley Young, Yao Jie Yan, and Dao Yu Feng. Also, Paul Andre Michaels was killed. These are the 4 victims of names I could find, and I actually worked for a little while to make sure I could pronounce them at least as correctly as I'm able to. And I apologize if I did not pronounce those as correctly as I could have done. But I wanted to say their names because I want us to remember that everyone in this nation is human. And we also need to remind ourselves that white people are not superior. That's the implicit racial bias of this nation. They're trying to figure out now if this killing was racially motivated, explicitly racially motivated. But I doubt they're going to ever look at how this was implicitly both gender and racially motivated. Right? We're getting better as a nation at calling out the explicit racism, sexism, and white supremacy. But we do not do a good job of condemning and calling out the implicit racism, sexism, and white supremacy that is littered throughout our foundations and our institutions and our structures. And so they may make a determination, I'm not sure, they were failing to draw conclusions yet if this was explicitly racially or gender motivated. But we need to acknowledge, based on our nation's history, based on the way that our nation has treated Asian Americans throughout its history, not only going back to the internment camps, and even before that, the Chinese Exclusionary Act and other things like that, but even in just how we've treated Asian Americans in the past 3 or 4, in the past 10, 12 to 18 months regarding the pandemic. So I want to just, I'm in a space of lament. I'm a little bit raw this morning, I have to acknowledge, because I am tired of advocating for the humanity of people who white America considers to be less than. I'm growing weary of always trying to advocate and saying, no, we're human. I want instead to begin to address the fundamental lie that our nation believes, which is that white people are superior. I've said this before, I've tweeted this out, I put this out in the public space, and people will call me racist. How can you be racist for saying white people aren't superior? That's not racist. That's just a fact. It's true. That's the fundamental lie that we believe as a nation, is that white people are superior. And so by stating the counter, the truth to that lie, which is white people are not superior, that's not racist. That's just truth. And if that offends you, if that makes you feel uncomfortable, if that makes you feel afraid, you need to look at, what do you implicitly believe about yourself? If you cannot handle someone saying white people are not superior, if that grates you wrong, then you have a broken worldview. Not only is it true, but it's countering the lie that gets spread throughout the laws, throughout the implementations of justice, throughout the structures and the institutions of our country, day after day after day after day. So we just have to start advocating for the truth. White people are not superior. Yes, Black Lives Matter. Yes, Native Lives Matter. Yes, Asians are human. But the proper accompaniment to that statement, to those statements, is not all lives matter. It's that white people are not superior. There will be more news, I'm sure, coming out in the following hours and even days regarding the shooting. And it is yet to be determined whether they will label this an explicitly racially motivated killing. I would say it's 50-50 whether they label it explicitly racially motivated, just knowing my country, the country that we live in. But I will continue to talk about, yes, they may determine this might not have been explicitly racially motivated, but the implicit racial bias that exists in this nation is so deep and so prevalent and so heavy that to say race did not play a role in this, to say gender did not play a role in this, is absolutely false. So these are the things that I'm thinking about today. I'm standing in solidarity with my Asian American relatives. I'm condemning this violence. And I'm also going to call out President Biden. He actually addressed the violence against Asian Americans in his speech the other night. And in his speech, he said hate crimes against Asian Americans are un-American. I absolutely believe hate crimes against any racial group need to be condemned. But to say they're un-American is actually ignoring not only our nation's history, but the foundations that were built upon. Right? Joe Biden loves to misquote the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. He says that all men and women are created equal. That sounds great, Joe. That's not what it says. It says all men. And we have a very, very, very sexist society today. We have foundations that define people as white men, and we've never fixed it. Slavery is still legal in our nation under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. So to say hate crimes against people of color is un-American is not acknowledging the ground on which you are standing, President Biden. Because according to our nation's history, according to our nation's foundations, according to the documents that we were founded on, that sort of violence is not only considered American, it's expected. And if we can't acknowledge that, we're never going to fix it. I wish it was un-American. I wish we had foundations that stated something different. I wish we had a history that did not lay out these values that we hold as a country, but unfortunately, that's not the history we have, and that's not the foundations we've been given. And so if we can acknowledge that these sorts of violent actions are absolutely very, very, very American, we're never going to fix the problem. Yes, we have to be better. Yes, we have to change things. Yes, we have to improve. But we have to start by acknowledging that our foundations are working exactly the way they were intended to work. And that's what we need to change. That's what we need to change. And this is a struggle that has gone on for 250 years. And if we continue to elect not only people like Donald Trump, but people like Joe Biden, we're not going to change it back. Right? The reason the struggle for equality in this nation has been 250 years and counting is not because people from the margins don't understand our own humanity. It's because white landowning men don't want to change the system that they use to exploit those beneath them. They want more time. They want to do it more slowly. They want to slowly get used to the idea that they are not superior. This is why the response to a president who is explicitly racist and sexist and white supremacist, like Donald Trump, is not someone who is completely opposite. It's just someone who promises to be a little bit nicer. Another white landowning male from the 1%, who doesn't promise to change anything foundationally, just to return us to the status quo, a status quo based on racism, sexism, and white supremacy. And we need to reject white landowning men's 250 years of a moving target towards equality. If it's too hard on them to adjust to living in a world where people who don't look like them, act like them, worship like them, or speak like them are still equal, then that's just too bad. We have serious problems in this country. And they got highlighted again last night by this violence against Asian Americans and specifically against Asian women. We need to condemn that violence. We need to acknowledge that this is who we are as a nation. And we have to be deeply committed to changing the foundations that we're standing on. I can't help my relatives. This is a lot to kind of ponder this afternoon. As I said, I'm feeling a little bit raw, but I've been thinking about these things a lot these past few days, and I've actually been reading a book. I'm writing a foreword for a book on the doctrine of discovery, and I've been reading through that book this past week and a half, and it's a very good book. I'm excited to write the foreword for it, but it's also it lays out a lot of things that are deeply, deeply wrong at an institutional, systemic, structural, and foundational level within our country. And yeah, we need to address them. We need to continue to address them. So I can't help my relatives. I encourage you to stand with our Asian American brothers and sisters today. I encourage you to stand against systemic racism, sexism, and white supremacy. I encourage you to stand in solidarity, advocating for their humanity, and also stating the truth that white people, white landowning men, are not superior. Walk in beauty, my relatives. May we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.